History remembers the emperors and kings of the past as figures of absolute authority, men who commanded armies of hundreds of thousands, hoarded the wealth of half the world, and held the lives of millions in a single hand. But behind the marble statues and the iron crowns, many of these seemingly untouchable figures were completely enslaved to vials, powders, and cups. We are going to track 10 specific rulers across 10 centuries whose unchecked substance abuse directly destroyed their bodies and fractured their empires. The systemic nature of monarchical power meant that the internal dependencies of a single man could dictate the trajectory of an entire state. Take the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He inherited an empire stretching from Britain to the Euphrates, but he also suffered from crippling insomnia, stomach ulcers, and chronic chest pain. His personal physician, Galen, treated these ailments with theriac, a compound containing raw opium mixed with honey and wine. Marcus took a piece the size of a bean every single day for the last 20 years of his life, developing a severe dependency that kept him awake for days during his failed attempts to quit. Further east, King Mithridates VI of Pontus lived with a lifelong obsessive fear of being assassinated by poisoned wine, the exact way his father had been murdered. To protect himself, he ate small, daily doses of every known toxin, arsenic, hemlock, snake venom, alongside a highly potent, opium-laced antidote to build his immunity. After 50 years of this toxic regimen, he was trapped by the Romans and tried to commit suicide by drinking poison. The decades of immunity worked perfectly, the poison did nothing, and he was forced to beg one of his own soldiers to run him through with a sword. In the classical world, the very medical traditions designed to preserve the ruler's health often left him physiologically tethered to the remedy. By the medieval era, these treatments evolved into a catalyst for imperial paranoia. Byzantine Emperor Theophilus suffered from chronic dysentery, which his physicians treated with heavy daily doses of opium-laced wine. The resulting drug-induced delusions led him to execute his own uncle and court officials on baseless conspiracy charges, while fighting a series of erratic wars that cost him massive territories to the Abbasid Caliphate. Similarly, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II relied on Arabian opium drafts called mufari, taking heavy daily doses dissolved in saffron and honey for over 30 years. Under the constant influence of the narcotic, Frederick's reign devolved into widespread suspicion. He executed dozens of officials, blinded his alchemists with red-hot irons, executed his rebellious son, and fought the papacy so relentlessly he was excommunicated 4 separate times. When imperial medicine triggered such severe paranoia, it destabilized the internal structure of these medieval states, often leaving them in the hands of child heirs and regents. In Western Europe, King Charles VI of France suffered a violent psychosis that left him convinced his body was made of glass. His physicians sedated him with crushed pocky heads dissolved in wine. While heavily sedated and dependent on these daily drafts, Charles signed the Treaty of Troyes, disinheriting his own son and handing the French crown directly to the invading English king. A few centuries later, King Charles II of Spain inherited severe genetic damage from 200 years of Habsburg inbreeding. To treat his seizures and fevers, Spanish court physicians fed him lethal daily doses of mercury and opium-laced sleeping draughts. This toxic cocktail compounded his genetic damage, entirely ruining his internal organs and leaving him completely unable to produce a dynastic heir. His death in 1700 immediately sparked the War of Spanish Succession, a 13-year conflict across the continent that killed an estimated 400,000 people. The attempt to treat biological decay with toxic metals ended the Habsburg dominance of Spain and triggered a decade of continental warfare. The pattern holds true in the East. Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I earned the nickname the Thunderbolt for his rapid military conquests, but his campaigns were fueled by secret, heavy drinking that drove him to incredible impulsivity and mass cruelty. When the Turco-Mongol conqueror Timur crushed Bayezid's army and captured him in an iron cage, the Sultan was stripped of his alcohol supply. He died rapidly from the combined effects of humiliation and severe alcohol withdrawal. plunging the Ottoman Empire into an 11-year civil war. A century and a half later, Selim II abandoned the daily governance of the empire to his ministers in favor of throwing days-long wine festivals. He even launched a massive invasion of Cyprus purely to secure a monopoly on his favorite vintage. He got his wine, but the strategic cost was catastrophic. A combined Christian fleet met the Ottoman navy at Lepanto in 1571 and destroyed 90% of their ships in a single afternoon. Decades later, Sultan Murad IV attempted to correct this undisciplined culture by publicly banning alcohol and opium under penalty of death. He walked the streets of Istanbul at night with a broadsword, personally beheading thousands of users on the spot. But Murad was secretly the worst alcoholic in his own empire, drinking from morning until night until he died of cirrhosis at the age of 27. Over 3 generations, the Ottoman court's internal struggle with addiction repeatedly traded strategic naval control and domestic stability for the bottle. We see this exact same contradiction in Qing China. In 1820, Emperor Daoguang inherited control of 400 million people who were suffering from a catastrophic opium epidemic fueled by British smugglers. Daoguang ordered a massive, violent crackdown on the drug, confiscating chests and executing dealers. Yet inside the Forbidden City, the emperor's own personal staff smuggled the drug to him so he could smoke it every single day. This is the Treaty of Nanking, the direct result of the First Opium War. Daoguang's anti-drug policies provoked the British, who used their vastly superior navy to crush every Chinese fleet sent against them. Look closely at the English signatures next to the imperial seals. This treaty formalized the total surrender of Hong Kong to the British and forced China to permanently legalize the opium trade. The ultimate tragedy of this reign was a ruler sparking a disastrous war over a drug that he completely lacked the willpower to quit himself. 10 rulers, 10 centuries, 10 sprawling empires brought low by the uncontrollable vices of the men at the top. Traditional history books often attempt to excuse these catastrophic reigns as eccentricity, bad military strategy, or a vague sense of royal madness. But the treaties signed away, the thousands executed in the streets, and the collapsed economies were the direct, observable symptoms of severe chemical dependency and withdrawal. The ultimate irony of history is that the men who commanded the entire known world lacked the power to conquer their own biology.